Finally, we're going to be discussing how in our self-disclosures we can own our own feelings and take responsibilities for the way that we feel rather than shifting that responsibility elsewhere, and how we can also engage in feedback in effective and productive ways. So in terms of owning your own feelings, there is a formula, so to speak, for how we can convey those feelings in a way that does not shift responsibility for the way we feel to other people, like, you made me feel angry, or I can't believe you did that because that really just made me mad. Those sorts of statements don't encourage further discussion and disclosure. Instead, they become statements of blame. And also, you don't want your feeling statements to become complaints or generalities, like, everyone is feeling the same way I'm feeling. Well, that's probably not something you could prove or that you could even know. So you have to be very careful that you take your own responsibility for the way that you feel. You don't shift responsibility elsewhere, or you don't try to strengthen your own complaints by saying that everyone feels a certain way. We achieve I statements, which is a description of how we feel, by describing what happened, then describing our feelings, and then give a reason why we feel that way. Some of the reasons why our I statements are vague and ineffective is because we have underdeveloped emotional vocabularies in which we have difficulty describing the way that we feel. And sometimes that's because of the culture that we live in, or maybe what we had modeled for us within relationships prior. And sometimes it's just because we lack the vocabulary. I really like your textbook has a couple of different pages that deal with different adjectives for specific feelings that you have. So rather than just having the word excitement, you might have anxious and exhilaration and a variety of words that are related to that, so that you can be more specific in describing your feelings. So when you say an I statement, you might say, when you complained about me arriving late, I felt really bad about that because I didn't realize that I was late, and I didn't intend to hurt your feelings by being late or give any indication that I was not responding appropriately to you. So that would be just an example of how conversationally you might talk through an I statement, where you would give the situation, your feelings, and the reason why you have them. Lots of times what we do is we mask our feelings by trying to cover them up. And some of you are good maskers, you have a good poker face, so to speak, and some of you are really bad at it, and you actually end up non-verbally displaying your feelings, which can lead to a lot of confusion because non-verbal behaviors, when they're in conflict and contradiction to our verbal behaviors, are oftentimes believed rather than the verbal. So you might be saying one thing and doing another, but the person's going to believe what you do. Actions speak louder than words. So you have to be careful in your displays of feelings that you're not giving mixed signals and that you're not displaying a feeling that you don't truly feel. And we may unintentionally do that without knowing it. So it's really important that you learn how to describe your feelings well and that you take responsibility for them. In terms of engaging in feedback, self-disclosure may be sought out by other people and you request feedback, or you may ask someone for feedback. You have to think about feedback and being in your best interest. Like, for example, if you ask someone at work to give an appraisal of how you're doing on the job, well, you have to understand and you have to think about it in terms of that information they're going to provide you is in your best interest. They're going to help you to be able to do your job better. Or let's say a friend, you might ask them, am I being there for you in an effective way during this really difficult time? Well, you have to think about what they're going to say to me is going to help me be a better friend. That way it can help you to stomach any sort of constructive criticism or negative comments that they may have. Also, before you ask for feedback, make sure you're ready for an honest response. If you don't want someone to be honest with you, then don't ask them for that information. So you have to be ready for it. Also, you have to take the initiative for feedback if you want to avoid surprises, because the way other people feel and the way other people are interpreting your behavior is going to end up coming out in interactions probably. So it's probably better on your part to just go ahead and ask for feedback ahead of time. Specify the kind of feedback that you're seeking. Tell them exactly what you want feedback on. Don't just be too general, because then that really just opens a can of worms, so to speak. try to avoid negative verbal and nonverbal reactions to feedback because it just makes you seem like you're ungrateful and it could do harm to the relationship. Try to paraphrase what you're hearing back to the other person. Engage in perception checking to make sure that you understand accurately what they're trying to tell you. And let the other person know that you're appreciative of what they're saying and the kind of information that you're providing for them. Now, if you're on the other end of the spectrum, that is, you're giving feedback to someone who's requested it from you, you have to really make sure that you're being very specific and sensitive to the other person. You have to really describe their behavior in detail so that they know what you are trying to get at. The more general you are, the more vague you are, the more difficult it's going to be for them to figure out what you're talking about. So if, for example, it's a friend and they asked for feedback on a romantic relationship that they're in, they say, what do you think about my romantic partner? Well, you need to be specific. You need to say exactly what you mean and describe the behavior. You need to try to preface any negative comments with positive comments because it's going to help not sugarcoat things, but it's going to help to affirm the good things. And if you don't affirm the good things, it's much more difficult for someone to accept negative comments or ways that they can improve. Be as specific as you can and try to tell the other person how they can make improvements. And even when you're giving someone a praise, it's important because constructive criticism can be negative and positive, right? So even when you're giving someone a praise, it's important to be specific, and it's important also to help them to understand the context of it. So hopefully you will have a few practical guidelines to go by in your self-disclosures and anytime you have to provide any feedback.